Hello, friend. How are you today? I hope you're holding your loved ones a little closer tonight, because sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones carrying the heaviest secrets. You know that feeling when you've spent your whole life believing a story about someone? When you've painted them as the hero or the villain in your own mind, never questioning if maybe, just maybe, you had it all wrong? Tonight, I want to share something with you. A story about two hearts beating in the same house, yet living in completely different worlds. About a sister who spent years drowning in her brother's shadow, convinced that love was a competition she could never win. And about the moment when everything she thought she knew shattered like glass. But here's the thing about broken glass. Sometimes, when the pieces fall away, they reveal something beautiful that was hidden underneath all along. This is a story about masks we wear, assumptions we make, and the kind of love that hides in the most unexpected places. So settle in, friend. Let's walk through this journey together, and maybe we'll discover that the people we think we understand the least are the ones who love us the most. Meet Maya, 23 years old, coffee shop barista, and the girl who learned to make herself invisible long before she understood why. Every morning, she wakes up to the same ritual: 5:30 alarm, quick shower, black coffee, no sugar. She's learned that bitter tastes don't surprise you the way sweet ones do when they're taken away. By 6:15, she's out the door, walking the same route to work that she's taken for 2 years now. Head down, earbuds in, lost in her own little world. People see Maya and think, well, they don't really think much of anything. She's the quiet one, the one who takes your order with a polite smile, remembers your usual drink, but never quite meets your eyes. Coworkers describe her as nice enough and keeps to herself. The kind of person who blends into the background of other people's stories. But here's what they don't see. They don't see how she practices conversations in the mirror, preparing for moments that never come. They don't notice how she lights up when customers treat her like she matters, or how her shoulders sag just a little more each time someone looks right through her. They don't know about the journal she keeps, filled with dreams she's too afraid to speak out loud. Maya has spent her entire life believing she was born to be a supporting character in everyone else's story. That some people are just meant to shine, while others are meant to watch from the shadows. She's made peace with being the forgotten one, the overlooked one, the one who claps the loudest but never gets applauded back. What Maya doesn't realize yet is that sometimes the people we think are invisible are actually the ones holding everything together. Maya's world was built on routine, the kind of gentle predictability that keeps you safe but never quite satisfied. Her apartment was small but carefully arranged. Everything had its place: books stacked by height on the nightstand, coffee mug always waiting by the machine, work uniform pressed and hanging on the same hook every night. She'd learned that control over the little things could make you feel less powerless over the big ones. At the coffee shop, Maya had become part of the furniture. She knew that Mrs. Henderson would order her decaf latte at exactly 8:15, and that the college student with the worn backpack needed his triple shot to survive morning lectures. She'd memorized their stories through fragments of conversation: divorce papers, upcoming exams, first dates, job interviews. Maya collected these moments like souvenirs from lives she'd never live. Her co-workers respected her reliability. Maya never called in sick, never complained about the early shifts, never asked for favors. She was the one they could count on to stay late when someone else had an emergency, to cover the holidays when others had families waiting. They appreciated her the way you appreciate a sturdy chair. Useful, dependable, but not something you think about unless it's not there. The afternoons were her favorite time. When the lunch rush died down and the coffee shop settled into that golden hour quiet, Maya would watch people through the window. Business suits hurrying to meetings, couples sharing secrets over shared earbuds, children dragging parents toward ice cream shops. She created stories for each of them, imagining their dinners, their dreams, their disappointments. Evenings meant going home to her one-bedroom apartment, where she'd heat up whatever was easiest and settle into her corner of the couch. The TV provided background noise while she scrolled through social media, watching other people's highlight reels. Sometimes she'd draft comments on friends' posts, congratulations, encouragement, jokes, but delete them before hitting send. What was the point of adding her voice to conversations that didn't need her? Before bed, she'd stand at her bathroom mirror, brushing her teeth and meeting her own eyes for perhaps the only honest moment of the day. In that reflection, she'd see someone who was tired of being so careful, so small, so forgettable. Someone who wondered if this was all there was, if she'd always be the person who watched life happen to everyone else. But Maya had no idea that just 3 blocks away, someone else was also staring into a mirror, carrying a weight that would soon change everything she thought she knew about being invisible. The call came at 2:17 in the morning. Maya had been deep in sleep when her phone shattered the silence. In that drowsy, confused state between dreaming and waking, she almost didn't answer. Unknown number. Probably a wrong dial, a drunk text, something that could wait until morning. But something made her pick up. "Is this Maya Chen?" The voice was professional, careful, the kind that's been trained to deliver devastating news gently. "I'm calling from St. Mary's Hospital. There's been an accident." The world tilted sideways. Her brother David. Car accident. Critical condition. Those words floated around her like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite put together. This couldn't be real. David didn't have accidents. David was careful, responsible, the one who always wore his seatbelt, who never drove when it was raining too hard, who texted when he got home safe, even though no one asked him to. Maya heard herself asking questions. What happened? When? How bad? But the answers felt like they were coming from underwater. Hydroplaning, guardrail, emergency surgery. Each word was a weight added to her chest until she could barely breathe. The 20-minute drive to the hospital passed in a blur of streetlights and panic. Her hands shook on the steering wheel as her mind raced through 1,000 thoughts at once. This morning, she'd been annoyed that David had called to check on her, rolling her eyes at his big brother protectiveness. Now she would give anything to hear his voice telling her to drive safely, to remember to eat something, to call if she needed anything. Walking through those hospital doors felt like entering a different world, one where fluorescent lights hummed too loudly and everything smelled like disinfectant and fear. Her parents were already there, collapsed into plastic chairs in the waiting room, looking smaller and older than she'd ever seen them. Her mother's eyes were red and swollen, her father's usually steady hands trembling as he filled out paperwork. For the first time in her life, Maya realized that David wasn't just her perfect older brother. He was the center that held their family together. He was the one who called their parents every Sunday, who remembered birthdays, who showed up for holidays, even when he had other plans. Without him, they were just 3 people who happened to share the same last name, lost and scared and suddenly aware of how much they'd taken for granted. As Maya sat in that cold waiting room, watching her parents fall apart, she felt something shift inside her chest. The resentment she'd carried for years, the jealousy that had become so familiar it felt like part of her identity. It all seemed so small now, so pointless. All she wanted was for her brother to be okay. Everything else could wait. 3 days passed in the hospital waiting room, and Maya began to see things she'd never noticed before. She watched her father's hands shake every time he tried to drink coffee. She saw how her mother would start sentences about David, then stop mid-word, as if speaking his name might somehow make his condition worse. And in the quiet moments between updates from doctors, Maya found herself staring at the ceiling tiles, counting them, trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly stopped making sense. It was on the fourth day that her mother asked her to do something she'd never expected. "Maya, honey, could you go to David's apartment? The hospital needs some of his insurance papers, and I can't." David's apartment. Maya had only been there a handful of times, usually for family gatherings he'd hosted, always feeling like a visitor in the space that perfectly reflected everything she wasn't. Clean, organized, successful. The kind of place where everything had purpose and meaning. But walking into that apartment alone, with David fighting for his life 20 miles away, felt like stepping into a museum of a life interrupted. His coffee mug was still in the sink, half-washed. His laptop sat open on the kitchen counter, the screen dark but somehow still waiting for him to return. A book lay face down on the couch, its pages spread like wings, frozen in the moment when he'd set it aside to go wherever he'd been going that night. Maya moved through his space like a ghost, opening drawers she'd never dared to open when he was there to see. And that's when she found them. Stacks of papers, folders filled with documents that made no sense. Medical bills, insurance claims, financial records showing monthly payments to facilities she'd never heard of. She sat on his couch, surrounded by evidence of a life she didn't recognize. Her perfect golden brother, the one who'd always seemed to have everything figured out, had been carrying secrets that weighed more than all his achievements combined. In the growing darkness of his apartment, Maya finally understood what loneliness really felt like. Not the kind she'd always known, the loneliness of being overlooked or forgotten. This was different. This was the loneliness of realizing that the person you'd spent your whole life resenting had been struggling in ways you'd never even imagined. She picked up a photo from his coffee table, their family at last Christmas, everyone smiling, everyone pretending everything was perfect. David's smile looked different now. Not fake, but tired. Like someone who'd been holding up a mask for so long, he'd forgotten what his real face looked like underneath. Maya sat there until the sun went down, holding that photo, finally asking herself the question she'd been too afraid to ask. What if everything she thought she knew about her brother was wrong? The truth came to Maya in pieces, like a photograph slowly developing in darkness. Hidden beneath bank statements and medical records, she found a handwritten note in David's careful script. Grandma Rose, treatment schedule, doctor. Martinez, Tuesdays and Thursdays. At the bottom, underlined twice, don't tell the family. She doesn't want them to worry. Grandma Rose, their father's mother who lived 3 states away and always insisted she was doing just fine whenever anyone called. Maya hadn't seen her in over a year, but David had been making monthly trips. The mileage records on his car, the gas receipts, the hotel bookings. Suddenly they all made sense. Maya's hands trembled as she called the number written on David's note. When Dr. Martinez answered, his voice was gentle but direct. Your grandmother has been fighting this for 2 years now. The treatments are expensive, but David insisted on covering everything. He said family takes care of family, no matter what. 2 years. 2 years of David taking extra shifts, skipping meals, wearing the same clothes until they were threadbare. 2 years of him smiling through family dinners while carrying the weight of their grandmother's illness alone. Every scholarship he'd earned, every award he'd won, every perfect grade that had made Maya so jealous, it had all been fuel for a greater purpose. In that moment, sitting in her brother's quiet apartment, Maya remembered something their grandmother used to say when they were children. The most beautiful acts of love, she would whisper while braiding Maya's hair, are the ones no one ever sees, They're like seeds planted in secret, growing in the darkness until they bloom into something miraculous. Maya finally understood. David hadn't been trying to outshine her. He'd been trying to save someone they all loved, protecting not just their grandmother's pride, but the whole family's peace of mind. His perfection hadn't been about competition. It had been about sacrifice. The golden boy she'd resented all these years wasn't golden at all. He was just a young man who loved so deeply, he'd rather carry the burden alone than watch his family suffer with him. For the first time in her life, Maya saw her brother clearly. And what she saw wasn't her rival. It was her hero. When David finally opened his eyes 6 days later, Maya was there. She'd been holding vigil by his bedside for hours, not scrolling through her phone or reading magazines like she usually did when she felt uncomfortable. Just sitting. Just being present. When he squeezed her hand weakly and whispered her name, Maya felt something shift in her chest. Not the old familiar ache of being second place, but something warmer. Something like gratitude. "Hey there, hero," she whispered back, and for the first time in years, she meant it without any trace of sarcasm. David's recovery was slow, measured in small victories. First steps down the hospital hallway, first solid meal, first real conversation that lasted longer than a few sentences. Maya was there for all of it, not because she felt obligated, but because she wanted to be. She'd finally learned the difference. She never told David what she'd discovered in his apartment. Some secrets she realized weren't hers to reveal. Instead, she showed her love in different ways. She brought him books she thought he'd enjoy. She learned to make the kind of soup their grandmother used to serve when they were sick. She listened, really listened, when he talked about his fears, his hopes, his dreams that had nothing to do with being perfect. Back at the coffee shop, something had changed in Maya too. She started making eye contact with customers, remembering their names instead of just their orders. When Mrs. Henderson mentioned her arthritis was acting up, Maya quietly slipped an extra shot of vanilla into her latte, a small kindness that seemed to brighten the older woman's entire day. Maya began calling their grandmother every Sunday just to check in. During one of those calls, Grandma Rose mentioned how worried she'd been about Maya seeming so distant lately. "But you sound different now, sweetheart. Lighter somehow." Maya smiled, looking at a photo of David on her phone. Not the perfect golden boy she'd always seen, but her brother. Flawed, caring, human. "I think I'm just starting to see things more clearly, Grandma." For the first time in her life, Maya wasn't trying to be someone else. She was just learning to be herself, and discovering that maybe, just maybe, that was enough. You know, there's something beautiful about the stories we tell ourselves about the people we love, and something dangerous too. Maya spent years writing a story about her brother in her mind, casting him as the golden child who had it all, while she played the forgotten one in the shadows. But stories, even the ones we tell ourselves, are just stories. They're not always the truth. The truth was messier, more complicated, and infinitely more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. David wasn't perfect. He was just a young man trying to do right by the people he loved, carrying burdens he thought were his alone to bear. And Maya wasn't forgotten. She was seen, valued, loved, in ways she'd never allowed herself to notice. Sometimes the people we think have it all are actually giving it all away. Sometimes the ones who seem to shine the brightest are the ones burning themselves out to light the way for others. And sometimes the love we've been searching for has been there all along, just wearing a different face than we expected. Think about the people in your own life, the ones you might have cast as the hero or the villain in your story. What if you're missing something? What if their perfection is actually sacrifice? What if their distance is actually protection? what if their success is actually service? Maya learned that the most powerful transformations don't happen when we change other people. They happen when we change the way we see them. So tonight, maybe reach out to someone you've been taking for granted, or someone you've been resenting, or someone you love but have never quite known how to show it. Because the beautiful thing about stories is that they're never really finished. There's always another chapter waiting to be written, and sometimes all it takes is seeing with new eyes.